The views expressed on this podcast are our own and do not constitute endorsement by the Department of War, the Department of the Air Force, or the U.S. government. Bring us her triumphs, her challenges, her legacy. Bring Us Women, a podcast brought to you by Isabella Horning and Ali Fatso.
Welcome back, Bring Us Women Squad. Today's guests master the art of flying on the right wing. Inches from pressure, miles from ordinary.
Colonel retired Nicole Malachowski was the first woman to fly with the United States Air Force Thunderbirds. She's a 1996 USAFA graduate, an F-15E Strike Eagle pilot. She was a Squadron Commander, a White House Fellow that advised former First Lady Michelle Obama and Dr. Jill Biden, and a National Women's Hall of Fame inductee, as well as a fierce veterans health advocate. Hey, Nicole, welcome to the pod.
Glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
We're so glad that you're here. So, Nicole, we want you to take us back to the beginning, set the stage for us. What first sparked your desire to fly, and did you always know that you wanted to serve?
Yeah, my earliest childhood memories were being part of that kind of rather typical middle-class American family that would go out to the Veterans Day parades, that would hang out when the local air show came to town. So I guess I'd start by saying that I was really lucky to be born a woman in the United States of America. And I think I was very lucky to be born into, a solid middle-class family, a mom and a dad. I never wanted for a roof over my head or food on the table kind of a thing. Both of my grandfathers had served in the military. My dad was drafted into the Army during the Vietnam War. And all that to say that I grew up knowing and being taught, right, that the military is a noble profession, that it's honorable and that it's good. And then around the age of 5 or 6, the air show came to town. And I remember going out there and I saw a jet called the F-4 Phantom flying. As you know, that was the workhorse of the Vietnam War. And I remember when it came by, like it was a feast for the senses for a young kid, right? I started shaking with excitement. I had to cover my ears because of the noise. I could smell the jet fuel. I could see it. The whole body rumbled, when it flew by low across the runway. And that's when I realized, like, whoa, wait a second. Like, you can be in the military and fly something like that? And that was really the time that I decided I wanted to become a fighter pilot. And I distinctly remember even talking to my parents about it way back then. I mean, we're talking 1979, 1980. I had no idea at that age, of course, that it was against the law. I mean, at that time, it was against the law to be, a woman fighter pilot, but luckily I was, blissfully naive at the time. And I remember just saying, I'm going to be a fighter pilot someday. And I was maniacally focused to the second part of your question, which is that's all I've ever wanted to be. I never had a backup plan. All I wanted to do was join the Air Force and become a fighter pilot. Now, timing, luck, and circumstance were on my side, in so much as the law was changed at the end of my freshman year at the Air Force Academy. And so that opportunity that had been denied to so many extraordinary women before me became available to me to become a fighter pilot.
Wow, that's awesome. So freshman year, you were going to the Air Force Academy. You were like, I don't know if I'm going to get to actually fulfill this dream, but let's just see what happens. So then you kind of decided to go for pilot. How did that look like after that you made that transition freshman year?
Yeah, so, I was lucky to stay really focused again in high school with Civil Air Patrol, with junior ROTC. I was taking flying lessons thanks to a scholarship from the Civil Air Patrol. All this to say, it just really, hardened my desire, to be a pilot. And so when I came in that freshman year, I think part of it was, you got to put up or shut up, right? Like, this is your one chance, right? So let's focus on academics. Let's focus on the military aspect. Let's do our best in athletics, which, by the way, was the hardest part for me at the academy. It was nice to finally be surrounded with other young people who also had the same goal. And we could talk about those things and we could keep each other, encouraged along the way. I actually remember my freshman year, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force at that time, General Merrill McPeak, he came through and did an all-cadet presentation there in Arnold Hall, right? The big blue bedroom. And I was so excited because I'm a young freshman and I want to be a fighter pilot. And at that very time, on CNN and on Capitol Hill, they were debating whether or not to change the law to allow women to be fighter pilots. So I'm like, oh yeah, my chance is coming. This is great. And General Merrill McPeak stood there as the chief of staff of the Air Force. As a freshman, you're in awe of this, right? A 4-star general. And he stood up there and flat out said, I would rather take a lower performing man over a woman, and I don't want women to be fighter pilots. And I remember like in front of the entire academy, and I remember just sinking into my seat. I remember feeling so defeated and so down that the chief of staff of the Air Force would say that. Lucky for us, Congress and other leadership, was able to get that law changed a few months later. But I can still remember sitting in Arnold Hall and thinking, my childhood dream since I was 5, and you're just going to stand up there, man, and say that women aren't capable of flying a fighter aircraft. That was really hard to hear. I thought at that moment that my dream was over, because I was so excited to see everything that was happening on Capitol Hill. And I just was like, oh, it's going to happen. And then it did change. And I actually remember the day that it changed. I had been walking around talking a big game as a freshman, telling everybody, I'd be a fighter pilot if they'd let me. And sometimes the guys, I would rid them. I'm like, you're lucky they won't let me be a fighter pilot because I'd take the spot before you. I was a little bit arrogant.
We love the confidence.
A little bit sassy. And then one day we're walking, across the terrazzo there, and command post comes on, and they were making the daily announcements. I don't know if they still do that. And they talked about how Congress had changed the law and that women were going to have an opportunity to be fighter pilots. And I remember my other cadet friends coming over all excited for me. Like, wow, Nicole, you can make this dream come true. You're going to have an opportunity to be one of the first women fighter pilots. And outwardly, I was like, oh yeah, it's going to be awesome. I'm going to be a fighter pilot. And inside I'm thinking, oh no, I got to walk the talk now. But just a year later, the most beautiful thing happened. My sophomore year, I think, maybe junior year, forgive me, it's been a hot minute. Jeannie Leavitt came through, Lieutenant Jeannie Leavitt, the first woman fighter pilot. And I couldn't go because I had mono.
Oh no.
I was stuck. And I was so upset. Back then, there wasn't any internet or Zoom or virtual way for me to watch, but all my friends brought back stories of listening to her. And just to know that her and Martha McSally, we're making it happen for people like me was awesome.
Yeah, that's first off, that's crazy that the chief of staff of the Air Force said that. I mean, part of me, like you said, you sunk in your seat, but I mean, I feel like, I don't know if this was true or not, but part of you might have been like, well, sir, sit back and watch me go do the damn thing.
Right. I remember feeling embarrassed though in front of the other freshmen, right? Because I've been talking a big game. Like, I'm going to be a fighter pilot. They're going to change the law. It's going to be great. And then the 4-star stands up there, and I could not make myself smaller to sink into my seat just as low as I could go.
Well, I mean, as your resume goes on to show, you definitely went on to be probably, by all accounts, a phenomenal fighter pilot. So he can.
I don't know if I was phenomenal, but I was lucky, lucky for the opportunity.
Well, speaking of that, once you graduated and you went on to pilot training, we know pilot training isn't easy. So do you have any advice for some of those young pilots now that are actively going through pilot training today?
Yeah, absolutely. Never study on a Saturday. My number one.
I like that rule.
I'm telling you, pilot training is hard. It's intense. It's meant to be, and it should be. And what I found is the people who just couldn't find those moments to relax, to decompress, to pursue something outside of just studying and the cockpit and simulators and flying, they were the ones that struggled. And you need to set aside time. You need to set aside boundaries to decompress. If that means that you sleep in on a Saturday because that makes you happy, you go to the mall or you Netflix and chill, you go work out, you call your family back home, you read a book, whatever that looks like for you, that's what you got to do. You got to take a break because that's the thing that matters, so that you can come back Sunday night, study, prep, and get ready for your Monday flight. But you got to take a break. You got to never study on a Saturday. Weird advice maybe, but it's my advice.
No, I love that advice. I'm actively thinking of people right now going through pilot training that really need to hear that. So I'll make sure that they for sure tune into this portion of the podcast, because
Tell them.
I think that's an easy thing to forget because you're in such a high stress situation. You're being strated. You're being like your aircraft depends on it. All of that, and sometimes
Yeah.
you benefit more from a break.
That's what I think. What do I
Well,
know though?
I feel like you know a lot. I feel
I
like
try.
that's sound advice.
I try.
So after that, you dropped the F-15E, and then all of that training that you did prepared you to lead the first fighter formation to provide security for Iraq's democratic elections. What do you remember most vividly about that mission?
I do remember that. That was January 2005. And again, timing, luck, and circumstance is the story of my life. It was pure luck that I was the flight lead leading the formation that was going to be airborne over Baghdad when the sun rose and the election stations opened. At that time, right, the Iraqi people hadn't had the opportunity to vote for decades. And I'll never forget the sunrise. I have to say that the way the sun rises in the Middle East is unlike anything I've seen in this world. I think it's because of the dust in the air. I'm sure there's science behind it. But the vibrant orange and the vibrant red, and when it rose on this day, it was just like, this is going to be a good day. And as the sun came up, I remember distinctly seeing, both with my eyes and through our sensors, because we knew where all the polling stations were, right? And so we were looking at all those locations. I just remember seeing lines and lines and lines of Iraqi people lined up. They'd been lining up, since before the sun rose, just standing there. And when I'm telling you, like, a line is a mile long, maybe I'm slightly exaggerating, but it was intense, right? Like, these people were standing in line, literally risking their lives to do something that we as Americans all too often take for granted, which is to vote. And I just remember being so proud of them. And I remember being so proud of my formation and so proud of what we were trying to do there, to bring them freedom, to bring them, democracy. And we can argue for a long time, I'm sure, what the impact of that was and what it is today. But in that moment, it was a big deal. It was a little bit emotional in a positive way.
Yeah, I can only imagine the emotions of seeing that, especially, thinking with all of the change that's going on now in the Middle East. I feel like that's, definitely something to think back and look on positively, for sure.
Yeah. It's a big day.
Well, then after this, you went on to be a squadron commander for the 333rd Fighter Squadron. You were responsible for, I'm sure, enormous resources, people's careers. That's a huge leadership position. How did you carry that weight? And do you have any examples of the hardest challenges that you faced as a squadron commander?
Sure. Yeah, there is no higher honor in the fighter pilot community than to be a fighter squadron commander. Like, that's where it's at, right? Because you're still tactical, you're still out there flying, but you're not high enough up in rank and stuff where you're kind of pulled out of that. It's the last time that in a fighter pilot's career that you really can adjust a mission. You can really take care of people, not just the airmen that are assigned, but their spouses and their kids, and you can really make a positive impact. So when I look back on my career, a lot of times people think I'm going to say the best part was being a Thunderbird or working at the White House and blah, blah. It's none of that, man. The greatest honor of my career was being Lancer 1, hands down. And I was there as a fighter squadron commander during an interesting time because we were operating under congressional sequestration. And at that time, we were manned at, I believe the most at any given time was 63% of our unit manning document. For those that aren't in the Air Force that might be listening, that basically a unit manning document tells you how many people assigned you are required to meet the mission that you're held accountable for. And so, that mission is a certain number of sorties, graduating a certain number of students as they come through to learn. And we're trying to do it with 63% of the assets. And I think one of the hardest things, right, was how do you balance asking everything of those aircrew? I need you to give your all without sacrificing safety, without sacrificing being home for their daughter's first ballet recital, right? This was peacetime. And so I remember distinctly a day I came in very early, and the squadron scheduler was in there. It was a young captain. I can see his face right now. And he was throwing pucks on the board, trying to schedule the day. And he's like, man, we just don't have enough people to fill all the sorties. I'm like, so I sat with him. We tried to create the puzzle. And we were just down 2 sorties because people were sick or whatever it was. And he's like, I'm going to take myself off the schedule. I'll fly the sortie. I'm like, yeah, I'll fly the other line. And then he said something that just, I'll never forget. He's like, yeah, my wife, she was in the ER all night. And we just got home, like, she just got home this morning. I was able to sleep because she sent me home, but she got home this morning and she's taking care of like our 3-year-old and our 1-year-old. And I'm like, stop. Like, we need to stop right now. This is ridiculous. You need to go home. And he's like, but ma'am, you're going to get in trouble for not filling these lines. I'm like, that's my job. My job is to be the screen between you guys and kind of that upper level pressure of sequestration and maybe what the wing commander at the time, is asking. I said, I'm the one that has to go stand in front of the wing commander later today at the wing commander's meeting. And that's my responsibility. And I will be accountable, for this decision. And it kind of is in that moment where you realize, like, what's really important. It's so easy to get caught up in this grind. We want 100% from you guys all the time. Well, imagine if I flew around in a fighter aircraft at 100% afterburner all the time. What happens? You run out of fuel a lot faster. And I remember bringing my guys in after that was probably a Wednesday. And I brought them into my Friday's commander's call. And I said, look, man, I don't want you guys at 100% afterburner. I want you guys at mil power. Because when I need you to go to afterburner, I'm going to ask you for it. And I need you to have the reserves to be there. And I did stand up in front of that wing commander, and I was the only squadron commander that had to cancel lines that day, and I explained why. And she, Jeannie Levitt,
Okay.
you see how the world comes full circle, my friend.
Full circle moment.
She understood. She was hard. She had a high standard. She's an extraordinary leader, an extraordinary pilot. But I made it unscathed that day. But more importantly, it forced me as a squadron commander to talk about the values that we're going to lead this squadron by. We're not going to have safety. No, we're not going to miss your daughter's first ballet recital because it ain't war, man. And you're going to go home to your wife if she was in the ER last night and take care of those kids so she can rest. So yeah, I don't know why that example popped into my head, but there it is.
No, I think that was a great example. And it kind of leads to the next question, because I think a lot of times, society and people always say like women are softer, or women are this, maybe they're like more empathetic, which is a strong suit, but in such a male dominated environment as a fighter squadron was, how did you balance being that like strong, fearless leader but also being approachable as a female commander in such a male dominated area?
A fighter pilot is more than just someone who flies fighter jets. I think fighter pilot is a mentality. I think it's an attitude that a fighter pilot has regardless of their gender. And so as a fighter squadron commander, being able to fly the jet, being able to maintain those fighter pilot qualities and traits, decisiveness, a proper level of confidence, credibility, that stuff is important. And I would say that a lot of times people say women might have, on average, a higher level of, what do we call it, EQ these days, or emotional intelligence. I can say that I don't know what the statistics are, but I met a lot of great men in my Air Force career who had very high emotional intelligence. And I think the thing that we had in common was a willing to be authentic and not try to put on the mask of the macho fighter pilot, not try to put on the facade of invulnerability. And I knew that as a squadron commander, I only had so much energy in a day. And if I was trying to be something that I wasn't, or if I was trying to project myself as what I thought other people thought a fighter squadron commander would look like, that was going to be a waste of time and energy that I needed to put towards the mission and towards my people. And I think by that time had hit an age where I had had enough poor leaders, let's just be honest, that I had learned a lot from that. And I realized that authenticity counts. People can sense an inauthentic leader from a mile away. And I thought, if I'm just who I am and I maintain fidelity to my values and who I am as a human being, even if it's different than what you might consider a fighter squadron commander to be, that's going to be more well received by these guys. And I learned that, adults act like adults when you treat them like adults. And when you demonstrate authenticity, that's the highest level of respect I think you can give teammates. And I think that that's what I tried to do. And it's funny you bring this up. Honestly, I do leadership consulting these days. And I would say about 4 weeks ago, I was giving a presentation and to a corporate event. There's lights on stage. I couldn't really see the audience, you know. We get to the Q&A section, and it was a guy who had been a captain in my squadron. And the second I saw him, I almost wanted to cry because I was just so happy. Like, I love nobody more than the Lancers. Like, I would do anything for every single one of these guys and a handful of gals any given day to this day. Like, I will drop everything for any Lancer. And to see him there, and guess what question he asked? The exact same question you just asked me. He said, you were so different than all the other leaders I had in a fighter squadron. How hard was that? What was that like? And why did you do it? Just like you guys asked, and I gave him about the same answer.
Well, we coordinated with him before.
You know what was interesting is there were 5 squadrons, you know, well, 6 if you include the OSS at Seymour Johnson at the time, as far as operational flying related. And it was not uncommon. I don't want to exaggerate, but I would say maybe 2 weeks wouldn't go by that a young male aircrew member, usually young, from one of the other fighter squadrons would come over to me, to my squadron, knock on the door and say, ma'am, you got a second? Would send me an email and go, can I meet you for a Starbucks? I know I'm in the other squadron. I don't know you, but I need advice. That was different. And oftentimes it was advice about marriage, kids, work-life balance. I don't want to be chief of staff of the Air Force or a general someday. I just want to fly the jet. You know, how do I navigate that line? Because everyone thinks we should all strive for this perfection. Ma'am, I'm thinking that I want to get out after my active duty service commitment, but I'm afraid what the guys are going to think of me. And I think that when I look back on that, that people would come to me from across the street or down the road from other fighter squadrons, man, that makes my heart feel really good.
Yeah.
So I'm getting a little emotional. We got to stop, man.
No, I'm crying over here. As a first time frontline supervisor, I can truly attest to that there's no greater feeling than, like, yeah, work questions are great, how to be proficient at your craft, but when someone comes up to you and they just want life advice, they just want an ear to listen to them and to give them that, like, really good advice that, you know, I think you are clearly very good at, and I think that's really special.
I will say I'm human like everybody else. I aspire to be good at it. You know, there was a time that one of my air crew's wife got a really devastating medical diagnosis, and her hospital was about an hour and a half away. And I, you know, did exactly what any squadron commander should do, right? I took a day off the schedule and I drove out there, and she was having a really bad day. And he was out there, obviously, at her bedside. And, you know, I stood outside the room, and there was a couple other people out there, friends, family. And so I thought, I'm probably not going to get to say hi. And I was just going to leave my flowers. And I had brought a note card, you know, and all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, they want to see you. And like, everyone's staring at me. A lot of people didn't know that were standing there, didn't know who I was. And it was just such a privilege, right? To go in there and to be a part of the hard moments. And when I walked in, we were kind of talking about that. I'm like, oh, there's other people, you know, I need to go. He's like, you know what, man, you earned the right to be in the room. Not everybody out there has earned the right to be in this room. Wow. And I almost lost it. And so I think for the people that are listening, for supervisors, future squadron commanders, whatever that looks like, work every day to earn the right to be in the room.
100%. Wow. Well, moving forward from that, you proved yourself as a squadron commander, and now you were like, you know, I need another challenge. I know the Thunderbirds is not something that you apply for very casually. So when did you first believe that this was actually a possibility for you?
Yeah. And just to be clear, I was a squadron commander after I was a Thunderbird. So I was a lieutenant colonel as a squadron commander. The Thunderbirds happened after my 3rd fighter squadron assignment. So, you know, after pilot training, I did a tour at RAF Lakenheath in England. That's where I got my first combat missions over Kosovo, Serbia. That's also where I met my husband of 25 years. Yeah, he's awesome. He was an F-15E weapons systems officer. Then the second assignment there was back in the 336 Fighter Squadron at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base. After that, where'd I go? I was in ALO with the Army 2nd Infantry Division, and then I went back to England, and I was in the 494th Fighter Squadron, which is where we did those combat missions over Iraq that we talked about earlier. And so it was from there that I made the application to the Thunderbirds. So I was a senior captain at the time. And I had found myself in a place in my career where I had every single certification and qualification as a fighter pilot, two-ship flight lead, four-ship flight lead, instructor, evaluator, mission commander. I led my peers in and out of combat. And it was weird because, as you know, there's like these timelines for PCS and all of that. And I wasn't old enough to go to, IDE, Air Command and Staff College yet. And I just, the options of going to the Pentagon as a senior captain, like poke my eyes out. I didn't want to do that. And, the Thunderbirds had always been in the back of my mind because I went to high school in Las Vegas, Nevada, right outside of Nellis Air Force Base. So I watched fighter jets. I saw the Thunderbirds all the time. And it always was in the back of my head. But it was at this moment in my career where I felt like I had the credibility and the skills enough to be competitive, to apply, but also that timeline, was really right. And I'd like to say, too, that I found myself in a squadron with leadership, male leadership, that was treating me as an equal, right? That was super supportive and straight up. His name was Dan Debris. His call sign's Trash. And we had a wing commander that was the same, Mark Matthews. And, when you find yourself in an environment where you're wanted, where you belong, where you're being mentored and nurtured, I think it gives you the confidence to kind of put yourself out there for kind of these extraordinary things, right? Like applying to be a Thunderbird, because that's pretty gnarly, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's pretty gnarly to put yourself out there, especially when there hadn't been a woman that had done it before. And so I think it was just kind of a couple of things, like that childhood dream. It was the right time in my career. I was starting to feel like I was credible in the jet and I could hold my own. And I had a supportive environment. So when I say my life is TLC, I don't mean, tender loving care. I mean timing, luck, and circumstance. I really am the end result of a lot of luck, but a lot of investment by a lot of other people. And just by the sheer nature of what I did, those people were really good men, Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you it was all candy canes and roses, because I think that that's not true. But the truth is, I was able to kind of rise above that noise and focus on the good and focus on the people that wanted me to succeed. And I think that mindset was key to my ability to have the confidence to put that application into the Thunderbirds.
Well, speaking of the application, I mean, we know that the Thunderbirds, like Ali said, no small feat. Can you tell us a little bit about what the application and selection process was like, and then also kind of what they look for beyond just flight hours and tactical experience?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about my experience back in 2005 when I applied, because it has changed a lot and it's a little bit different, and I don't want to speak to what the process looks like today for the current team. So at that time, you had to put a paper application in. You weren't sending PDFs on email. That didn't exist, right? You're typing up pieces of paper. You're putting them in the yellow distro envelope, and you're sending them from RAF Lakenheath to Nellis Air Force Base, space age travel on a KC-135. So it was a big application complex, like you might imagine. There was a picture of me in uniform, a letter of why I wanted to be a Thunderbird. All of my OPRs from my whole career, all of my flying test, check ride scores from my whole career, and then letters of recommendation. And you had to get a letter of recommendation from the first, 06 in your chain of command and all of that. And so I was able to put that application together. You obviously had to meet the minimum requirements too. At that time, this is kind of a funny story that a lot of people don't know, and maybe one or two people have held against me. So let's just put it on the table. At that time, it was a minimum of 1,000 hours to apply. And when I mailed off my manila envelope, I think I had 992 hours. And my squadron commander and the wing commander, Mark Matthews, were like, just put your application in, because by the time the distro envelope, makes it to Nellis, you'll have those extra 8 hours, and they'll know by the fact that we wrote these letters of recommendations, that we support you. And so I went ahead and I shipped it off. And of course, I did, in fact, have well over 1,000 hours by the time they read the application. From there, the application goes in and I deploy to Operation Iraqi Freedom. So I'm out there flying that mission over Baghdad. One of those days, I think I was sitting SOF instead of flying squadron, what is it? Squadron Operations Fly. I don't even remember what freaking SOF stands for right now. I'm having an old lady brain moment. Supervisor at flying. So I'm in the air tower. It's like 2 or 3 in the morning. I'm, landing the KC-135s and Strike Eagles back from their combat missions and having a good time with the enlisted airmen that are up there doing air traffic control. And all of a sudden I get an email, and it's from the Thunderbirds, and you're like, whoa. Because I had set the application, and it had been a few weeks. It had been a few months. Like, they sit on it. It's torture. And I open the email, and it says, hey, you're a semifinalist. And so you need to be at Nellis Air Force Base next week for the semifinal interviews. Yeah, I'm deployed.
Wow.
Yeah, right? You're like, no way. My childhood dream is coming true, and I'm not going to be able to go because I'm deployed, to Al-Udeid or whatever. So the next morning, I went to Dan Debris, my squadron commander. I said, you're not going to believe this. But I got picked for the semifinals. Now, the number of people who apply every year, that adjusts. The semifinals my year, I think they picked 12 people, maybe 10 to 12, somewhere in there. And this was for 2 spots on the team, 3 total, but 1 spot was for the commander, lieutenant colonel, so I didn't qualify for that. So we were competing for 2 spots, out of 12 people. Long story short, Dan Debris worked his magic, and I kid you not, I flew straight to Nellis Air Force Base. My husband in England shipped my service dress, and it met me there.
Wow.
And I was at Nellis Air Force Base with the team. And yeah, so there's a lot of interviews. You interview with the team. You hang out with the team for a few days. I think part of it's good so that you can see, do I really want to be part of this mission? You get a kind of behind the scenes look. Is this something I really want to do? But also the enlisted are interviewing you as well. There's 125 people from 25 different career functions, and we're all under one roof, and everybody has a say. And you could tell you were being interviewed, not just by the other pilots, but by every other career function. You also do some interviews with the general officers. Those are kind of intense, right? The Nellis Wing Commander, Air Force Warfare Center Commander. And then they send you away. And they said, hey, we'll let you know in 2 weeks. So if you're going to make the finals. So the finals, they bring in 5 or 6 people. Now I'm thinking to myself, I ain't going to make the finals. So I wrote back to my squadron commander. I'm like, all right, I'm ready to come back. And he's like, well, when's the finals? And I'm like, in 2 weeks. He's like, well, you need to stay. And that was really gut wrenching because I was away from my squadron who was flying in combat without me. And they had given up a line and a body for me to go have this opportunity. People were picking up my slack. Let's not sugarcoat that. And it was interesting because I thought, what happens if I don't make the finals? And I've wasted these 2 weeks and I should be in combat. Anyways, I made the finals. That email came through. And that was different because now you're really intense interviews with the generals. You also interview with public affairs. So they're checking your ability to communicate, to speak, to answer questions on camera, right? To be a public face of the United States Air Force.
Some would say a celebrity.
Well, it's a unique position. That is true. And you also fly with the team. And what was interesting is of the 6 of us or 5 of us that were there in the finals, I was the only one that wasn't an F-16 pilot. So you take off and you go fly. Well, everyone else is just flying an F-16 that's painted a different paint color. They know how to do that because they've been flying F-16s for 8 years. I get put in a D model. The pilot does the takeoff, Scotty Zamzo, a great man. He was leaving the team at the time. He ended up staying, but that's a whole story for another day. But he was the left wingman, kind of the experienced pilot. He was also a Strike Eagle brother. And he said, Nicole, you can do this. All right. And here's what you need to do. And we took off. He gave me the jet. Maybe 60 seconds after takeoff, he said, your aircraft. And it was the first time I'd ever sat in an F-16. That's a lie. Actually, I flew an F-16 on Operation Air Force, I think, as a cadet. But, I'm got a side stick. I don't fly with a side stick and a Strike Eagle. So I have about 5-6 minutes till we're out to the training airspace. And then I'm flying on the wing of Thunderbird 1 doing loops and aileron rolls.
Oh my gosh, I can actually not imagine that.
Never flown an F-16 in my life, man. And what was funny? The song that was big at that time that was out was Eminem's, this is 2005, I'm old. Eminem's, you only got one shot, do not miss your chance to blow. This opportunity comes once in a lifetime. And that was the song that was in my head over and over and over. I'm like, you have this one shot. Do your best. So anyways, after that, finals, another few days with them, intense interviews, some flying, a little bit of media training and practice. They sent me back to combat. And I finished out the combat tour for a couple more weeks with my squadron. And we ended up back at Lakenheath. And they gave you a few weeks of R&R. So my husband took me on a cruise, a Baltic cruise. And we were hanging out in the fjord of Norway. It was 10 o'clock at night. It was bright sunshine out because it was, that time of year. And the phone rang in the cabin. And of course, when the phone rings when you're deployed, what do you think? Your heart immediately drops, right? Something bad's going to happen. My husband picks up the phone. He's like, yeah, stand by. He hands it to me. I said, hello. This guy goes, stand by for the commander of Air Combat Command.
Oh.
And that's how I found out. That was a long story. You all are going to have to edit and cut that.
No, I loved every moment of it. I was on the edge of my seat.
So that's the Thunderbird story.
Well, I mean, when you got that call, did it ever kind of cross your mind, or maybe when did it cross your mind that you were now going to be not only a Thunderbird, but the first female Thunderbird?
Yeah. You know what's interesting is when I applied to be a Thunderbird, it's not that I don't think I knew, or subconsciously maybe I didn't consider it. I wasn't thinking that. I didn't know necessarily that there hadn't been a woman Thunderbird pilot. I know that sounds naive, and people always tell me, no, you're lying and all that.
No, I believe you, because the people that we've interviewed, we've interviewed first females on this podcast, and all of them have very similar answers, that they had no idea. They were just doing their job, doing something really cool, working towards a goal, and then they just kind of found out afterwards. It's oh, I was the first.
That's exactly how it happened. I always tell people that, when you follow your dreams, you might accidentally make history along the way. And that, that's really essentially, what happened. For me, it wasn't that big of a deal. For the wonderful men that I flew with on the team, it was no big deal for them either, because they were my age. They never knew an Air Force without women fighter pilots in it, right? And let's be honest, there would have been a woman Thunderbird pilot before me if there hadn't have, a ban on women being fighter pilots. I was in that first group of women who was able to attain 1,000 hours of flying time in order to qualify. I wasn't special. Again, timing, luck, and circumstance. There were so many women who came before me, who could have done a far better job, I'm sure, than I did. And they just weren't provided the opportunity. And so I think everyone was excited. And then I started seeing it in the news. You're 29 years old, and all of a sudden it's in the news. And then public affairs is reaching out. We need to do interviews with CNN. We need to do interviews with the Washington Post. And I think that's where you realize, this is actually important to some people, or this is intriguing to people outside of the Air Force. And that's when I realized that I was blissfully naive. And I think it's good that I was blissfully naive at the time, or maybe I wouldn't have applied. But that's when it kind of hit me in the face that my experience as a Thunderbird pilot is going to be different than prior Thunderbird pilots. Not in a bad way, not in a good way, just different. And indeed it was.
Yeah, I can only imagine that. I celebrities in the news nowadays, but being the first person to do that, I'm sure a lot of people wanted interviews with you.
You know what was beautiful is 95% of it was so positive, so supportive. I would say people were just tickled. I received thousands of letters from around the world of congratulations, and I answered every single one of them by hand.
Wow.
And I have 16 8-inch binders in storage right now because I kept every letter. And it was positive. It really was. And what do you think that demographic looked like, right? Bunch of young gals between 8 and 18. And the number 2 demographic, can you guess, of people sending me supportive letters? What do you think it looks like? Because it surprised the heck out of me.
I would say dads of girls.
That was definitely up there. Male World War II veterans.
Hell yeah.
Male World War II veterans could not get over it. They loved it. And they would always reference the WASP, right? Mm-hmm. Remember the Women Air Force Service pilots of World War II? If they hadn't have done what they did, I would have never had the opportunity to do what I did. And so it was so cool to be connected to the WASP, through these memories of these male, World War II veterans. And I think it was hard to get those letters too, because what's the other 5%, right? That other 5% well, what I like to call letters of non-support. And
Trash.
There were some pretty nasty things. I was threatened with violence. I was threatened with sexual assault. I had to get OSI involved with some weird stalker haters. So you're trying to do all of that while being interviewed by CNN while flying 18 inches, 3 feet away, from other jets. And so all while being under quite a microscope. So yeah, it was hard, but it is what it is. And someone had to do it. And if it wasn't me, it would have been somebody else. And it would have gotten done just as well, if not better.
Yeah. And I even wonder, hearing about all the letters that you received from young girls, if maybe one of those letters from one of those little girls went on to be a Thunderbird.
It could happen.
That would be super cool if that was the case.
My very first air show, Fort Smith, Arkansas, when we landed, I was just so grateful that I made it through the show. I was so relieved, right? And when I went to the autograph line, you know how the pilots go to the autograph line to sign autographs, take pictures. Public Affairs was kind of around me, and there was cameras and seeing, all the news agencies. And when you stand on the line, you stand in order. And I remember, oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank on her name right now. Katie Garcia. She was the Public Affairs NCO at the time. She was helping me through that. And she said, I need you to stop and I need you to look up. And I looked up, and the line in front of me was farther than I could see. And when I looked over at the other pilots, the gentlemen, awesome friends, awesome men, awesome officers, they had 10, 20 people deep. And that's when it occurred to me, and you imagine what my line looked like, right? You know what my line looked like, 8 to 18 years old.
Miles.
Yeah. It occurred to me then that it means something to see someone who looks like you succeeding, and that this had nothing to do with Nicole Malachowski. This was all about them, and that idea that my presence catalyzed or inspired their own dreams, whether it was to be a pilot or to be a scientist or to be a lawyer someday, whatever that was pretty cool. And so there's this picture that went out in the news, and I'm signing an autograph for this young gal. She's wearing a Civil Air Patrol sweatshirt. She's got a big sun hat on, and she's looking up at me like I hung the moon. And when I got pulled from the autograph line, she hands me a piece of paper, and it's got her email on it. She was 13 years old. Her name's Sarah. And when I got into the van to drive away, the public affairs people, they said, Nicole, you're not going to be able to answer everyone. You don't have to send her an email. You have to focus. This is going to be too much. So, of course, I went home and I sent her an email. And she's a F-15E Strike Eagle pilot right now, about to pin on lieutenant colonel, married with 2 kids. And we're still friends.
How cool.
That's so
How cool is that, man? I'm so damn proud of her. I burst with pride.
That's amazing.
Yeah. True story.
I love to hear stories like that. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But you mentioned how, you just, before you're signing autographs, you just finished the air show, and it's a nerve-wracking experience because of the insanely tight maneuvers that you do as a team. Can you kind of talk through some of that formation flying and kind of describe what Thunderbird 3 actually does, kind of in specifically the diamond formation, because we know that that's one of the closest formations that you guys fly?
Yeah, so at that time, Thunderbird number 3 flew in the right wing, position. So my job was to be the best number 3 I could be. Everything I did, every maneuver, every formation, number 1 was my world. I did everything to fly in position off of him. I think one of the hardest things to do when you're flying in such close formation is to let go and let number 2 and number 4 do what they need to do, to trust them to be in their position, to not worry about their flying, but to keep your mind in your own cockpit, in your own jet, and just focus on number 1. And as long as all of us are flying formation off of number 1 and we're staying accountable to the position we're supposed to be in, that's how that formation ends up in alignment. We're flying plus or minus 1 degree, heading plus or minus 1 to 2 knots, of airspeed. And so the level of trust is extraordinarily high. The trust that you have to have in the other pilots, but the trust that they also have in you. You feel the weight of that as well. And you need to be trustworthy in everything that you do. We were flying traditionally 3 feet away from each other. We could get as close as 12 inches as wingtip to wingtip, as sometimes some of those maneuvers happened. I think one of the funny things when I think about flying in the diamond is from the ground, it looks all smooth, right? It looks nice and everybody's stable in formation. And that's because you're kind of far away from the ground. I can assure you that thing is moving. It is shucking and jiving, being in position is a transient moment in a lot of cases. You're constantly fighting to get back to that place of in position. And, when you're on your first year in training, you're like, hell yeah, I'm plus or minus like 3 feet. This is awesome. By the end of your first year, you're like, yeah, I'm within a foot. By the end of your second year, like I could literally tell if I was 3 to 6 inches out of position.
Wow. I always think about that. Like, what's the margin of error that we're looking at there?
Inches.
Like, oh gosh.
And I think more importantly, microseconds, right? Because it's about your ability to use your judgment to assess the situation, because things don't always go right in a formation. Things don't always go right in an air show. I would like to say that that's not true, but life happens, whether maybe it's turbulence, maybe it's an aircraft malfunction, maybe a pilot's having a bad day, because we all had them. Maybe all of a sudden you're freaking in formation and you go into the clouds accidentally, or the sun is in your eye and you can't see. It's in those moments that faith in yourself, your teammates, and the judgment that you've honed over your 8 years as an operational fighter pilot come into play.
Yeah, all those combat hours are being put to work, I imagine. So, kind of take us through, like, what's happening to your mind and body during a high-speed pass at show center? Are you nervous, or is that training just kind of overriding those nerves?
I think early on in my first few air shows, I was nervous, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't, But by the time you get some experience and credibility, you're entering your second year, I think that those nerves are gone. Again, just out of sheer repetition and trust in your teammates, and honestly trust in your own skills, I think those nerves, really calm down. And what I would say is it's nothing but really intense focus. Like, it is 30 minutes of the biggest mind game, you have ever had. When you land, sure, you're physically tired because flying fighters is physically demanding. But from Thunderbird flying, I was more mentally exhausted than I ever was landing from a combat mission. Because you are so close. You are making thousands of micro decisions, thousands of micro movements during an air show just to stay in position or transit through in position. And so I found it very mentally exhausting. When you're coming by and like say the Diamond Pass in review, which at that time was the opening maneuver, number 3 was on the high side. And I would always take a moment to look through number 1 and look down at the audience. It was always super cool to see those people down there, because I'm thinking, to your point earlier, somebody down there is going to be Thunderbird 3 someday. Somebody down there, is going to join our Air Force because of this. Yeah. Somebody down there is an airman, who is taking pride in being an airman right now because of this. And I think that that's some pretty powerful stuff.
I know every time I saw you guys perform, I felt an immense amount of pride. And I also felt like if I was up there, I might be throwing up, because I get nervous just to go on a normal flight. So I cannot imagine doing what you guys do.
Well, remember, you don't become a Thunderbird without being a pilot. And, if you're in a plane and someone else is flying, it's normal to be nervous. If you were in control of the aircraft and you had 8 years of experience, Allie, we could let you and teach you how to do it too. I promise.
Okay, thanks. I'll take your word for it, Nicole.
I wouldn't be a very good intel officer, so let's just call it, mutual. But you talk about this idea of pride, and that's, the important part about being a Thunderbird, whether you're a pilot or you're enlisted crew chief or any of those other functions, it's the honor of a career, right? But it's a huge responsibility, huge. And all of us Thunderbirds, officer and enlisted alike, worked so hard to represent our amazing Air Force, the greatest Air Force in the world, with the honor and the dignity and the respect that the airmen and their families deserved. And you wanted very much to live up to that expectation. And so I wouldn't call it pressure as much as just you want to be accountable to that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense.
Cool.
Well, we want to switch gears a little bit, because we know you went on to do some pretty incredible things post being a Thunderbird, and also very different things than just flying in the aircraft. So what was it like going from being a combat pilot, Thunderbird, to now finding yourself as a White House Fellow? And kind of like, what was that big culture shock of that transition?
Once again, I think I found myself kind of having to stretch and grow kind of out of my league in a little bit. The White House Fellowship is extraordinary, and I highly recommend it to any mid-career officer. It's the nation's leadership development program. It takes Americans from all professions, all industries, all walks of life that are mid-career, who've shown maybe a propensity for being high performing, and it brings them to Washington, D.C., basically to shadow a cabinet secretary and to see how the sausage is made, right? To see not only the challenges faced by the federal government, for our country, but I think to also see the opportunities, to learn about policy and all of this. And I show up once again, just sometimes I feel like Forrest Gump, right? I'm just like running around, finding myself in all these cool things. So I go from Thunderbird to White House Fellow, like one elite experience to another elite experience. And to be with my classmates, there were 3 other military officers that year. So it was 4 of us total, I think another 11. So I was with business leaders. I was with lawyers and teachers, and I was with scientists and doctors, and who were high performing people. And I think the shock factor there was, wait a minute, there's people outside of the military who understand leadership and teamwork in a different way than me. Like, wait a minute, the military doesn't have a monopoly on good leadership or leadership styles. It's true. I mean, I had just pinned on major, so I'm still kind of, young and learning. So to be able to learn from these other people, to be able to build a network of mentors and role models that looked at problems differently than me, that looked at opportunities differently than me, eventually made me a better officer. It made me a better squadron commander when I left there, so that then I could go on and teach what it means to have diversity of thought, what it means to push yourself, to be curious and ask the hard questions when things make you uncomfortable. And that's what the White House Fellowship teaches you to do. And as luck would have it, once again, timing, luck, and circumstance, I showed up in a transition year. So we did 6 months under George Bush and 6 months under Barack Obama. And as other luck would have it, I got assigned to the office of the president-elect. So I am a major in the Air Force who has zero business being in this room, trust me. Meeting with Bush in the morning in the Oval Office to get direction for the day, going across town to the non-disclosed location and meeting with Obama and going, how's the transition going? I was the person ordering the copier paper. I was the person making sure that SIPRNet was up. I was the person that was letting the chiefs of staff come in. I would welcome the people being interviewed for cabinet secretary positions, and I knew who they were before they were ever announced in the news. Once again, I was a major in the Air Force who had no business. But man, you rise to the occasion. And it's one of those moments where you just have to believe those who believe in you. And what happened was I witnessed the peaceful transition of power of the most powerful office in the world up close and personal. And that was extraordinary. And it makes me a much more critically thinking American these days as I watch what's going on.
I think that is such a cool position to be in, especially just, always watching the news and wondering, what's behind all of that decision making, kind of peeling that onion of Washington. So while you were in that position, were you advising senior leaders, or what was that like?
I was doing everything from pouring coffee to advising senior leaders on policy, absolutely. And everything in between. It was ridiculous. Okay. I remember, I want to make sure I don't want to use names. Some of this is just, confidential professional stuff, but a gal that was coming in at a very, very senior level, I knew who she was and I knew who she was going to be. And I was walking by, she's like, hey, Major, come in here. I'm like, yes, ma'am. What do you think about X, Y, or Z? And you're just standing there going, I better get this right. Especially when it came to a lot of military issues. They would actually lean on me for questions. Might sound scary, but it was the truth.
It's a lot of responsibility. I'm kind of curious, how do you speak truth to power, respectfully but courageously?
Stick to the facts. Keep your emotion and your opinion out of it, and deal only in data, deal in numbers, deal in process, procedure, regulations, deal in facts. And if you've got that behind you, and you present that, then it's easier to do. Now, sometimes you are asked your opinion, and they use the word your opinion, and they use the word how do you feel, and that word feel means something. And at that point, I've never held back because I think it's a disservice to the person asking the question. If they're asking your opinion and how you feel, it's okay to say it. Put a ma'am on the front and a ma'am on the end, you'd be all right.
I think
Wow.
that goes back to your authenticity too. I
Yeah.
mean, you have to do everything authentically, and advising senior leaders is no different than how you behave as a squadron commander. So
Right. That's
I think
right.
that's cool to see.
Well, do you have a favorite person that you met during that time or got to work with while in the White House?
Oh man. I got to have brief run-ins with like the big name celebrities, but I think if we fast forward 7 years, I found myself assigned to the White House again. I was a full bird colonel, and I got assigned to lead as the executive director of the White House Joining Forces Initiative, which has everything to do with service members, veterans, military families across all aspects, right? From military child education, military spouse employment, veterans homelessness, PTSD, wounded warriors, you name it. It involved a lot of trying to wrangle the 40,000 and 16,000 veteran service organizations, military service organizations across the United States. It was an extraordinarily difficult job and a very important and impactful one. I mean, if you're going to work that hard at such a high level, high risk position, it might as well be on behalf of your tribe. And that's kind of what kept driving me every single day. But in that role, I worked for the First Lady of the United States, who at that time was Mrs. Michelle Obama, as well as the Second Lady at the time, Dr. Jill Biden. And I learned a lot about leadership from Michelle Obama. And people can put their preconceived notions aside as they're listening and put their politics aside for a second. I can say with 100% confidence that she was in the top 3 leaders I ever met in my 20 years in the military. An extraordinarily strategic woman, visionary, I would say obviously highly credible and highly intelligent. Anybody that looks at her background and her record knows she had her own professional legs to stand on, outside of her husband and what he did. To watch her decisiveness and how she could be decisive and hold an extraordinarily high standard and do it with compassion and kindness. And the thing that she taught me was this idea of boundaries. Man, she protected her children and her personal life, and her ability to find work-life harmony was instructive to me. And I would just say that I would work again for her any day of the week. Any day of the week. Yeah. And that surprises people, because sometimes people go, oh, well, quote, the First Lady doesn't have a quote unquote real job. Look, that lady was working harder than probably most people in the White House, and was working longer hours than even I did as a military officer, unpaid and taking spears every day from the public and in the news and everything, and did it. Why? Because she is authentic. What you see, let me tell you, maybe that's why I loved her so much, right? What you see is what you get. There isn't any ulterior motive. There isn't anything there, man. The authenticity train is legit with her. And I think that again, is instructive, was instructive to me and instructive to all of us. So I was really grateful to learn from her.
I think that's so unique to say that one of your most formative female mentors was Michelle Obama. Not a lot
Also,
of us.
yeah, who can
have
say
someone
that?
Like, yeah, that is pretty awesome.
Well, and I didn't see her necessarily often or interact as substantively as maybe that sounded, because I want to make sure that I represent it right. A lot of it was observation. Don't get me wrong, I saw her every week, but every day I was with her chief of staff, and the same dang thing applies to this woman. Her name's Tina Chen, another extraordinary leader. Like these 2 women were managing giant portfolios, projects with very substantial impact, and they entrusted me to work alongside of them, and it meant a lot. Yeah, cool women.
Love
That's
to hear it.
awesome.
Women getting the job done in DC.
That's right. One of the things I wanted to say, one of the shocks I had as a White House fellow, but more importantly, when as a full bird colonel, I joined joining forces at the White House, and now I'm in some really high level meetings. Like this is even more intense than the White House fellowship stuff that I mentioned earlier. One of the things that they did differently, or the things that surprised me and at first I really had to adjust to, is at these really high important meetings, there were 23-year-olds. Like there were people fresh out of college. Like this is their assignment, and they're writing policy like on, immigration or nuclear policy or domestic policy, any of those things. And my initial reaction, right, as a military person was, whoa, like, and that's after observing, I realized, wait a minute, the Air Force doesn't talent manage as best as they can. This idea that you have to have a certain number of years in a certain role before you can meet promotion, before you can get the next level of accountability and responsibility, maybe isn't the best way to talent manage. I mean, I saw 23-year-olds that could run circles around my Naval War College butt when it came to national security policy, and it was impressive. And it really opened my eyes to how myopic we can sometimes be in the military when it comes to talent and recognizing it and giving roles and accountability and responsibility. I don't know how to adjust it. I understand we're very rank forward. I haven't really thought through that as far as the military, but these young people at the White House, especially the ones working in the East Wing, you know, on childhood nutrition programs or girls' education globally around the world, they blew my mind. I was the old lady in the East Wing, trust me. Her staff impressed me every single day. I learned a lot about judging people by their experience, their age, or their duty title. Does that make sense?
No, yeah, it makes sense. I like to say that, you know, rank is fluid. Depending on the day, depending on what room you're in, you might have to pull on your big boy pants.
Some people live up to their rank and some people don't also. And I think, you know, there's so many great examples of great leadership in our military, but if you go through a 20-year career, you're going to see the opposite as well. And the key is how do you learn from that? Mm-hmm. And what do you learn from that? You can learn more, you know, it sounds trite, we all hear it, but you can learn more from negative examples in many cases than you can from positive.
No, absolutely. Well, we do know that at the height of your career, your life changed pretty dramatically when you discovered that you had a neurological tick-borne illness. Yeah. Can you kind of take us to that moment when you realized something was seriously wrong and how that changed the trajectory of your life?
Yeah, I never thought this would happen. This is one of those things, right? That none of us are immune from human suffering and none of us are in control, you know? Mm-hmm. And so it started in the summer of 2012. I was the commander of the 333rd Fighter Squadron, finishing up my assignment there. I started getting sick. You and I could spend an hour talking about this, but I'll try to just synopsize here. Started getting sick, couldn't figure out what was wrong. Doctors kind of treated me like a medical mystery. I went off to Naval War College and it got really, really bad. I was struggling to read and write, which is hard to do when you're trying to get a master's degree. They sent me to doctors in Boston. They couldn't figure it out. You know, I was barely passing the PT test. I just felt like horrible. I had all sorts of pain, fatigue, cognitive issues. Fast forward, I'm trying to hold on to my career. I'm trying to avoid an MEB. You know, my dream is to someday try to get to the higher ranks in the military and lead airmen from higher levels of responsibility. So it's all I'd ever wanted to do since I was a kid, right? And so I feel it slipping through my grasp and it's out of my control. And I find myself as a full bird colonel in the East Wing working for the First Lady. And I knew things went really wrong because I woke up in my bed in Springfield, Virginia, and I couldn't move or walk. I was experiencing temporary locked-in syndrome, and I had to wait for my husband to come home and find me in bed. And at that moment, I knew something was really wrong, right? And instantaneously, my husband became my caregiver. For the next 2 years, I wouldn't be able to interact with my children. I went from a really high-performing officer, you know, supposedly an elite fighter pilot, to completely broken and bedridden overnight. They sent me to Massachusetts General Hospital. I was in a wheelchair. My husband was talking for me. They cast the net wide, and that's where they discovered I had late-stage neurological tick-borne illness. A lot of people ask what that means. It means I had Lyme disease and 4 other tick-borne pathogens. There are over 20 tick-borne pathogens in North America, and one tick bite can transmit more than one pathogen. Unfortunately, I had gone both undiagnosed and misdiagnosed by military medicine for 4 years. And during that time, the bacteria and parasites, multiplied until they broke through the blood-brain barrier, and they ended up infecting my brainstem, in particular, a place called the pons. And the pons is the last place in your brain you want an infection. And that's what was causing this kind of intermittent locked-in syndrome that I had. So for the next 9 months, I was bedridden, had a PICC line to my heart, antibiotics, home health care nurse. I did a 1.5 years in rehab at Fort Belvoir to learn to walk, talk, read, and write again. So that was 2 years of my life kind of gone. And during that time, I went through the most awful, horrible, undignified military evaluation board process. And I was found 100% unfit for duty and medically retired. And so, during that time, it was like an existential crisis, right? Who am I if I'm not wearing my Nason's uniform? What do I do if I'm not a fighter pilot? How do I provide for my family? And the day of my medical retirement, 29 December 2017, I was home alone. Nobody from the Air Force called. I have never had a retirement ceremony. And the majority of my retirement paperwork was mailed to me in a manila envelope. Thank you for your service. And I think that feeling of abandonment and betrayal, which is what it was and what it is, still hurts me. Ain't gonna lie. I'm not even gonna sugarcoat it. Still hurts me to this day. But I've decided to remember my Air Force experience for all the amazing stuff that happened and the amazing people that I met and the positive things that I've shared over the last, I guess hour probably with you guys. And it turned into, how do you reinvent yourself? Mm-hmm. And that's where I realized that all of the characteristics and traits I'd honed as a fighter pilot were exactly the traits I needed to survive my illness, to advocate for myself, and to reinvent myself. And that's where I became kind of focused on my next target, my next mission, right? Which is doing patient advocacy work for other people with late stage tick-borne illness. And I don't want to sound dramatic, but I wanted to give voice to the voiceless, the people that couldn't speak like I couldn't, the people who are laying on their couch alone with no support. And so I've dedicated a large portion of the last 10 years, a decade of my life, to doing very high level patient advocacy work at the executive federal level, testifying in Congress, with academia, with nonprofits. And I will do that until the day we find a cure. And I will do that until the day I die. It's extraordinarily important to me. And I found another cool thing in there, right? The Air Force Wounded Warrior Program. Mm-hmm. The only people that took care of me when I was in bed those 2 years was the Air Force Wounded Warrior Program. And I highly recommend it to anybody, all ages, all experience levels, all ranks, any wound, any illness, any injury. Lean on the Air Force Wounded Warrior Program. It is there for you. Reach out. If nobody in your chain of command connects you, it doesn't matter. Go to their website and connect yourself. Do it for you. Do it for your families, because they really helped me during an extraordinarily dark time. So I'm very proud to say that to this day, I am a trained ambassador and mentor with the Air Force Wounded Warrior Program. I'm currently mentoring 2 airmen that are going through their own medical evaluation boards. Nothing makes me happier than to act like a full bird colonel when I pick up the phone and I call their squadron commander and go, hey, you need to do this or that. The colonel can still colonel, and I still get to lead airmen. I'm just doing it in a very different way.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible to hear that, because you could have, when every part of your life was telling you to throw in the towel and just end it all, quit, like, you found all these new passion, like, life-fulfilling things that are so important to you and so important to, like, a multitude of people, just as much as you being the first female fighter pilot was. And the impacts that you're probably making on the Hill, in other areas of health, all that, like, I'm sure are just incredible. So
I used to think my legacy, is I was going to be the grandma in the rocking chair, on the porch. Grandma used to be a fighter pilot someday, one day, a long time ago. And that's what I did, and I was an officer in the Air Force. And I now realize that this was all just a step along the way. I impact more people on a grander scale, more deeply, more quickly, doing what I do now than if I had ever stayed in the Air Force. So in fact, I believe I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be.
What'd you say? Timing, coincidence?
Timing, luck, and circumstance. TLC, baby. Story of my life.
That's crazy.
I was never the best officer. Certainly never the best fighter pilot. Probably not the best patient advocate, but darn it, I'm scrappy and I'm persistent. I'll tell you that.
Hey, that's what me and Issa always talk about. We're always chasing those delusional goals, and
That's
we're
right.
gonna get it. We're gonna get it done no matter what. So
I tell people my goals are aspirational because I'm constantly aspiring, trying to get there. But definitely a work in progress. And I was able to reinvent myself into leadership consulting and professional speaking. It helps pay the bills. People always tell me, because I have a lot of complex chronic symptoms from the brain injury, and I can't fly anymore. And people are always like, "Oh, Nicole, I'm so sorry you can't fly." And I always tell them, dude, it's not the flying that I miss, man. I miss being a part of a team. I miss leading airmen. I miss being around people who care with a shared mission. And so by being a speaker and a consultant these days, like, very selfishly, I become part of their team for a day or for a week. And it, like, fills the hole that's in my heart. And I try to make a difference in corporate America and I take some of these cool military lessons learned and see if it can help their teams and their processes. And along the way, I learn a lot about them. Like I said, The military does not have a monopoly on good leadership and teamwork. There are some extraordinary Americans out there doing amazing things, and I'm just really privileged to have the opportunity to go learn from them.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Do you have any like groups of people that you've gotten to talk to through this speaking journey that kind of just like blow your mind of like, wow, it's so cool that I get to talk to this group of individuals and they want to hear my story. They want to hear about my life.
I think it's just interesting to meet a lot of these high-level CEOs and look at their leadership style and how they can, I guess, establish and nurture cultures that are totally healthy, right? That are safe, that are innovative, that are willing to take levels of measured risk, and they do it in a way that, like, just the military didn't do, but in a maybe kind of nerdy way. Like I talk to every industry, and so I have to go online and Google and study. Like, I mean, I was just talking to people about agricultural fertilizer. Like, I'm learning about like phosphate and potassium and potash and, and another day I'm talking to people in Silicon Valley about the latest developments in AI, and it makes me a more informed American. So that when I turn on the TV and I see farmers talking about tariffs, or I see people talking about the ethics of AI and everything in between, I'm a bit smarter for it. And I feel like these people, by sharing their industry and their profession with me, by sharing their cultural strengths and their organizational struggles, have selfishly made me a much smarter American. And I'm very grateful for that.
Well, I feel like we've already learned so much from you. So I think...
Thanks for having me.
And I just want to say, after this amazing career that you had and then reinventing yourself into this entirely new person that's just out doing amazing things, when you look back on all of that, what do you want your legacy to be moving forward?
You don't get to choose your legacy. I think, that's up to other people to probably describe me and what I've done or what it means to them. But my hope is that in my life, that all along the way, at every stage and at every turn, that I've been helpful. I want to know that I've been helpful. That's it.
Well, I mean, I think listening to all the stories you've told over the past hour, like, I feel like, honestly, I would like you to help me and help us.
You know where to find me, ladies. You know where to find me. Let me know.
Well, we're just so grateful that we could talk to you. We've had a blast hearing your stories, hearing about all the vast experiences that you've got to live and are still actively taking part in. It's just really, really cool. We're really excited to have our listeners hear about it. So really just thank you for coming on the Bring Us Women podcast.
Thanks for listening. I appreciate the gift of your time, and I want you both to know that I'm just extraordinarily, extraordinarily proud of you, and I wish you both the best of luck.
Thank you, Nicole. That means a lot. That means a lot.
Thank you for listening to the Bring Us Women podcast. Nicole's story proves that even when life doesn't go the way you planned, your purpose doesn't go anywhere. It just finds a new way to shine. From flying with the Thunderbirds to becoming a voice for others, she is the definition of resilience and impact. And if there's one thing we know, it's that women like this don't just inspire us. They raise the standard. Make sure to follow us on Instagram and wherever you get your podcasts to stay up to date on all things Bring Us Women. Until next time, be bold, keep leading, and we can't wait to bring you the next woman. The views expressed on this podcast are our own and do not constitute endorsement by the Department of War, the Department of the Air Force, or the U.S. government.